There's currently a handmade copy of Station Decimus sat on a shelf in a board game cafe in Bicester, alongside games which have had thousands of pounds of investment in manufacturing and artwork. The owner was happy to have it there, which surprised me a little bit until I sat back and really thought about how it can benefit both cafe owners and designers. Before I go into that though, let's take a look at the numbers since the last episode and see what's moved. The mailing lists continued to grow and we've had 11 new email subscribers, 2 new Kickstarter followers. No demos yet, but as I mentioned, I'm waiting to hear back from a few conventions I've applied for next year, so fingers crossed those will come through soon. YouTube subscribers is up by 13, so we've continued to see a really good growth in the channel, which is great because it means people are enjoying the content. And finally, there's been 1 new member in my Discord channel. So in this video, I'm going to be focusing on how board game cafes can be a really great opportunity for organic marketing. There are 3 main reasons I've approached board game cafes to try and get my game played. Number 1 is that people in a board game cafe are already in exactly the right mindset. Most of the time they want to play a game that's new, or at the very least that they don't own. So they're there to experience something different, and if my game is sat on their shelf, it might just be the thing they decide to give a go. Number 2 is board game cafes give you access to a whole new market. Everyone who already follows me on social media probably knows about the game, and I can hopefully try and persuade them to try out the print and play. Those in board game cafes, however, have probably never heard of me and may never come across my social media, so this is a great chance for me to reach them with the game. And finally, it removes any barrier to playing the game. While a print and play offer is great for some people, for others the barrier of actually cutting out the game and getting it to the table can prove too much. When a game is already sat there, even just as a prototype on a shelf, it can be far easier for someone to pick it up and give it a go. They might be bored, they might be looking for something new to play, whatever the reason, they have basically no barrier to get going with the game. And a bonus reason here outside of the marketing angle, but getting an idea of how often the game is picked up from a shelf gives me a really good idea of the kind of shelf presence that the final game might have. I expect it's not going to have quite the same shelf presence at the moment, being a handmade prototype, but it at least gives me an idea. So if, like me, you've decided you'd like to try and get your prototypes out into board game cafes, where do you start? The obvious answer is to Google all the board game cafes near you and then send them emails or give them a call to ask if they can stock your game. The problem with this, though, is you aren't really giving the board game cafes the attention they deserve. The people who run these cafes have put a lot of time and effort into running them, and it's only fair you put in some effort to make sure that it's A, an appropriate fit, and B, it will be a mutually beneficial thing for both you and the cafe. So instead, I've come up with a rough framework I've been using to try and identify which board game cafes I should reach out to in which order. This is extra important as I have very limited copies of Station Decimus, so I want to make sure I use them effectively. The way I went about identifying these cafes was to use AI to scrape cafes and then apply certain criteria to them, which once it had given me a shortlist, I could then look at and manually verify. It was actually quite important that I automated a lot of this, as there are loads of board game cafes out there, and many of them have in fact closed or moved, so the information you'll find on the internet might not be correct. Knowing exactly which ones were the most likely candidates and then taking a look at their website and social media myself gave me a really great chance of understanding which would be the best fit. One of the main criteria I used was the distance and drive time from my house. This was for a few reasons, such as being able to drop off the game, but more importantly, it was really about whether or not I'd be able to build a relationship with the board game cafe. I don't want to just dump my game there and be done with it. I'd like a relationship with whoever the owner is or the people who work there, so that they can provide me some feedback on how the game's being played, and also so that I can help support local board game cafes. I also categorized the venue type, so a lot of things that will come up when you search for board game cafes can actually be friendly local gaming stores, genuine and dedicated board game cafes, cafes which happen to have a couple of board games like Scrabble in the corner, or community venues like village halls. Now, which of these categories the board game cafe falls into is really important for how likely they are to want to take a prototype game, and also how likely it is that the kind of people visiting it are going to want to play a prototype. Speaking of the likelihood of them accepting a prototype, I also used this opportunity to get the AI to do some research on whether or not they've hosted any playtester events or things which are good indicators that they are likely to accept a prototype. So, having got this research and all of this information in one place in a roughly ordered list, I started working through them one at a time to verify the information that I'd been given was in fact correct, and then to try and identify which of these candidates was most likely to accept a copy of the game. In the scoring, I gave extra weight to distance, as I knew I wanted to try and build a relationship with cafes and had a very limited number of copies. This would also change the way I would approach reaching out to them. So, whether it was in person, via social media, or cold emails if I'd never been to the store before. With the store that I currently have a copy sat in, I was able to message the owner and tell them that I genuinely really liked the store before asking if they'd be interested in a copy of the game, because I'd made the effort to go and visit it, sit down for a coffee and a cake before I'd contacted them. So this was my overall method, and I also limited the number of results to a local geographic region because I knew that the number of copies I had wouldn't scale beyond that. The idea would apply the same if I was to try and scale out further, so I could look further and further away from my home location and try and find more and more likely candidate venues. So with my new list of roughly prioritized cafes, which I had manually verified, I set about trying to decide how I would contact them. And I roughly broke this into 3 types of contact. The relationship targets, which I've already mentioned, so cafes I would visit in person and try and build a relationship with the owners. Warm outreach, where I could find enough information about the cafe online to try and tell the owners that I genuinely do think this would be a mutually beneficial thing for us, and can give them clear examples, such as if they host a lot of playtesting events. And then a slightly colder outreach, where I had limited information on the cafes, and it was more of a, hi, I notice you have a cafe, I have a game, could I possibly get a copy of it in there, without going into the specifics of how I think it might be a good match. And so far, I have only made that one outreach. This is because the scale of making games takes quite a long time. If you've seen my other videos on prototyping methods, I've used my spray adhesive method, which can take several hours to get a single copy ready. With everything else I'm doing for the channel and marketing at the moment, the amount of time I actually have to make extra copies of the game is particularly limited, which is also another reason why that prioritization process was so important. So what do I actually provide to the cafes? The cafe I visited has a copy of Station Decimus sat on their shelf. It's a prototype copy, but it is theirs to keep. As I update any rules or artwork, I will try and visit the cafe and provide them updated components. Inside the lid of the box, there is a crafted note thanking the players for playing, providing them some more information on how they can reach me if they have any feedback, and providing a QR code to my website if they'd like to follow along for the Kickstarter. As well as this, I have also offered the Board Game Cafe owner a free copy of Station Decimus once the Kickstarter funds to sit in their cafe library. I will talk for a minute about the quality of the prototype, and this is, in my opinion, quite important. Not because I need the game to look like the polished and final article on the cafe shelf. It still comes with the caveat that it's under development, but because in a cafe, people are probably going to treat the game slightly rougher than you might with your own homemade prototypes. So you want to make sure that whichever prototyping method you use is sturdy enough that the game will survive. For me, my Kickstarter is the best part of a year away. I think at this point it's about 9 months for launch. So I need to make sure that that game can survive 9 months of hopefully being played and that it doesn't disintegrate before then. As I mentioned for logistics, I visited the cafe personally to drop off the copy of the game. This was great because it gave me a chance to really get to know the owner there. But if I was to look at cafes which are further afield, I would need to consider how I would potentially ship copies to them and make sure they survive in one piece, while again being prototype copies. So another reason why they need to be sturdy. With this, there will of course be an added cost of delivery. Although everything else in this program of cafe outreach is relatively cheap, the copies I make only cost a few pounds, and the real sink is the time taken to make them. So, a little bit about where you can play Station Decimus right now. If you happen to be in the Bicester area or near Bicester, you can drop into Noughts and Nibbles. It's a really nice, really well run, and really well stocked with cake and games cafe run by a man named Phil. He was incredibly friendly and open to the conversation of whether or not my game could go into his library, and I would highly recommend, if you're in the area, you go and check it out. We had a really good conversation about the game and the development process, and yet again, it just goes to show how welcoming and friendly everyone in the board game community seems to be. Beyond that, Phil showed a real interest in prototype games. He was able to show me a copy of a small print run game which had been gifted to him from another creator who had made their copies for the Bastion Indie Market at UK Games Expo. And he actually mentioned that he is considering having a small section highlighted for games which are still under development or are as yet unreleased to try and help more independent designers, which is a great initiative. He's also looking into running playtesting events and things like that at the cafe, which is another way in which designers and cafe owners can work hand in hand for mutual benefit. So while I have my first game out there, that's not the end of my involvement with Noughts and Nibbles. The plan is to try and reach out again in about a month if I haven't had a reason to go there anyway, which I may well have done in the meantime because it was such a nice cafe. But I want to make sure that I can try and get a gauge of whether or not anyone has picked up and played the game and whether or not anyone had any feedback on it. It's entirely possible some people might think that the game is okay or have some comments on things they'd like improved, but not bother to email me or reach out on any of the socials I provide. They might just mention it to the cafe owner. If they do, I'd still like to hear that feedback, so I'll reach out on the off chance they remember and can let me know anything that's been going on with the game. Is it having any impact on the shelf? Are people largely looking over it? Or does it have any shelf presence which is intriguing to people? So that's how I'll be following up with Noughts and Nibbles, but in the meantime, I'm hoping to also dedicate a little bit of time to making a few more copies of the game to try and get into a few more board game cafes. The idea is that by the time of the Kickstarter launch, there will be a handful of copies which have been sat in cafes and hopefully played to get the game in front of as many people as possible. As I mentioned in the earlier video in this series around my content strategy, the fourth principle and the key to the whole strategy overall is trying to get the game in front of people, and this is another way I'm trying to do that. That's it for board game cafes. So just a quick recap on other signs that the overall 40 to 1000 strategy seems to be heading in the right direction. Recently, my prototyping video was picked up and shared by the Cardboard Edison newsletter. This is actually the second time they've shared one of my videos, which for me is a really good indicator that it is providing value on its own. They have no reason to share it unless they think it will provide value to the people who follow their newsletter. So seeing it in there is a great sign. It's also led to a small spike in signups at the same period, which, while I don't have the data to directly connect the two, is a pretty strong indicator that it's led to some more emails. So that's it on the 40 to 1000 series as it stands today. As I mentioned, if you want to go and check out Station Decimus, head to Noughts and Nibbles in Bicester, or if you're too far away, you can download the free print and play from my website. The link will be in the description below.